Good morning. I'm glad that all of you are here with us today. We're still in our series in the book of Numbers, Lessons from the Desert. My last semester at Truett Seminary, the route suddenly changed. It was the beginning of the 2017 semester, spring 2017, and I was finishing my master's degree. It took 5 years to graduate. Because first, the Master of Divinity is a 93-hour degree, and second, I was a commuter student who traveled from Houston to Waco every Tuesday and Thursday. 4.5 years I had driven the exact same route. Take I-45 north, straight through Huntsville. Do not depart from the road, neither to your right nor to your left, even for the Buc-ee's in Madisonville, until you come to Buffalo, Texas. Take exit 180, turn left onto Highway 164, pass through the sleepy towns of Groesbeck and Mark until 164 merges with Highway 6, which will take you into Waco. If I left my house at 4:30 a.m., I could make it with 30 minutes to grab a cup of coffee at my favorite coffee shop in Texas, Common Grounds, before my 8 a.m. class. That was my schedule. More than my schedule, that was my life for 4.5 years. Then one morning, without any notice, without consulting me, they changed my route. Highway 164 closed, and I had to take a detour, adding 30 minutes to my drive. To make matters worse, I discovered this detour the first day of class that final semester, and it threw my entire routine off course. I was late the first few months. One morning I received a speeding ticket. Yes, even pastors get speeding tickets. Another morning I hit a deer, or rather a deer hit me. My beloved cup of coffee and 30-minute settling time was stolen. I've never felt like a victim more in my entire life than I did that semester. But I did it anyway. You know why? It's because I was getting my master's degree. And it was just ahead. It was just around the corner. There's nothing positive about detours. No sane person in the history of the world has ever said, "Oh goody, a detour." Detours cost additional time to your travel, time that many of us simply don't have. The alternative route is typically crowded with other grouchy drivers who are also out of time. The roads forced upon us are dusty and pothole infested. Detours are an unfortunate part of life that all of us often encounter. In Numbers chapter 20, verses 14 through 21, as the Israelites begin their final semester, not of seminary, but of wilderness wandering, they too encounter a detour. We turn there now to Numbers chapter 20, verses 14 through 21. Moses sent messengers from Kadesh to the king of Edom, saying, "This is what your brother Israel says. You know about all the hardships that have come on us. Our ancestors went down into Egypt, and we lived there many years. The Egyptians mistreated us and our ancestors. But when we cried out to the Lord, He heard our cry and sent an angel and brought us out of Egypt. Now we are here at Kadesh, a town on the edge of your territory. Please, let us pass through your country. We will not go through any field or vineyard, or drink water from any well. We will travel along the king's highway, and not turn to the right or to the left until we have passed through your territory. But Edom answered, You may not pass through here. If you try, we will march out and attack you with the sword. The Israelites replied, We will go along the main road. And if we or our livestock drink any of your water, we will pay for it. We only want to pass through on foot, nothing else. Again they answered, You may not pass through. Then Edom came out against them with a large and powerful army. Since Edom refused to let them go through their territory, Israel turned away from them. This is the word of the Lord. Praise be to God. On paper, Edom seemed like the best route option into the promised land. According to Hebrew tradition, the nation of Edom were descendants of Esau, the older brother of Jacob, one of Israel's patriarchs. Edom, you see, was Israel's kinfolks. Now they may only be those odd second or third cousins that you only have to see at the family reunion once a year, but they were still family. If you notice, Moses even appeals to them as your brother, Israel. But if you also recall from Old Testament 101, the patriarch Jacob and his brother Esau were often at odds with one another, wrapped up in this love-hate relationship. Over the course of their histories, the two nations are no different. The Edomites write back with a strong hand, You may not pass through here. If you try, we will march out and attack you with the sword. Israel experiences the first of many detours as they attempt to push their way into the promised land and out of the desert. They didn't know it yet, but they were about to learn lesson number 5. The way to the promised land is filled with detours. It's not just an Israelite singularity, however. Accomplishment. Even today, accomplishments are always accompanied by setbacks. Right when we think we've got the budget worked out, an unexpected expense puts us in the red and the bank calls and says, You're overdrawn. Right when we think that a rocky relationship is finally going to take a turn for the better, she says something tacky and hurtful and the relationship is back at square one. Right when we finished a remodel, a heavy thunderstorm comes along and floods the house all over again. What's that old saying? 2 steps forward and 1 step back. Life can certainly feel that way. The way to the promised land is filled with detours. So what can we learn from the Israelites' setback here in Numbers 20? Is there a lesson here for us about how we can handle life's detours, how we can handle life's setbacks? Well, I think there is. First, when dealing with detours, I think the first thing we can learn from the Israelites is we don't have to surrender to despair. We don't have to surrender to despair when we encounter a detour. I love the way the passage ends. It simply says, Israel turned away from them. That's it. It's so subtle. No despair, no calamity. Nobody is weeping and wailing. Moses didn't bring out the sackcloth and the ashes quite yet. It's as if they collectively and calmly thought, all right, okay, Edom, that's fine. Let's try something else then. But their lack of overreaction shouldn't be surprising at this point, should it? I mean, most of that murmuring generation that got them into the 40 years mess, most of that generation has passed away, and it's been 40 tough years. But God has been right there. I mean, right there in the middle of them the whole time. You know, it's amazing how well a person can handle detours when they know that God is with them. In 1873, Hannah Spafford lost all 4 of her daughters in a single accident. While crossing the Atlantic Ocean on their way to Europe, the vessel carrying the young family collided with another ship, and within 12 minutes, the ship sunk into the dark waters. Out of the 313 passengers aboard, 226 of them died, including the Spafford children. While searching for survivors, a sailor on a rowboat discovered Anna alive, floating on a piece of wreckage. Meanwhile, her husband, Horatio Spafford, a successful lawyer, had stayed behind in Chicago to finish up some business, but when he heard about the wreck, he immediately boarded a ship to join his mourning wife. About 4 days into the journey, the captain called Mr. Spafford into his quarters to inform him that they were now passing right over the place where his 4 daughters had been lost. And by the time that ship pulled into the harbor in Europe, Mr. Spafford had written these words: "When peace like a river attendeth my way, when sorrows like sea billows roll, whatever my lot, thou hast taught me to say, it is well with my soul." That's a little insane, isn't it? A man has lost all of his kids, almost lost his wife, and he writes, "It is well with my soul." Today we would have locked him up in a loony bin, wouldn't we? But it's not so crazy for us, is it? It's not so crazy for someone who believes in Jesus. For those of us who believe in Emmanuel, God with us, who now have the Spirit of God dwelling in our soul, we too can say of detours and calamities and setbacks, it is well with my soul because of Emmanuel. It doesn't mean it's okay. It doesn't mean that the detour is good. It means that I can do this. I can handle this because I know who is with me. The way to the promised land may be filled with detours, but we don't have to surrender to despair because of Emmanuel, God with us, Jesus Christ. Second, when dealing with detours, we need to be adaptable. It's a scary word, I understand. But this is the Israelites' story for the rest of the book of Numbers. Time after time, they have a plan. They think it's a good plan. They start heading down a road only to discover a "turn around, don't drown" sign. We know that it must have been a stressful existence because the temptation to turn around and run back to Egypt is constantly lurking in the background. Over and over again, the people complain, "Why can't we just go on back to Egypt, Moses?" But they don't. Again and again, the Israelites, they adapt and they find a new way. It was the same problem that Lewis and Clark encountered when they paddled upstream in search of the legendary Northwest Passage. In his book, Canoeing the Mountains, Todd Bolsinger writes, for over 300 years, explorers of at least 4 sovereign nations had been looking for a water route that would connect the Pacific Ocean to the Mississippi River, and everyone just knew it was out there. The Northwest Passage. Lewis and Clark spent 15 miserable months of rigorous canoeing and harsh living until they arrived at the peak of a mountaintop, only to discover that the Northwest Passage didn't exist. Instead of a peaceful descent into the Pacific Ocean, what the explorers discovered were the Rocky Mountains. Thus, Bolsinger's book, Canoeing the Mountains, Bolsinger writes, the driving assumption of the brightest, most adventurous, entrepreneurial, and creative leaders regarding this new world had been absolutely mistaken. And yet, that did not stop Lewis and Clark. If that stopped them, we wouldn't know anything about them at all. They didn't return to President Jefferson and shrug their shoulders and say, "It's not there," and resign from their mission. Although disappointed, the adventurers turned from sailors into mountain climbers, and they continued their mission, and that's where their real adventure of discovery began. It's the part of the story that we know most about. When we are facing a detour, adaptability isn't just a good idea. It's not just well, that's a neat thought, we could do that. When facing a detour, adaptability is essential for survival. What's the other choice? Death in the desert? Returning to the old way of doing things? The old way of doing church? Returning to slavery in Egypt? The promised land was for them and is for us always the best option. And if they want to get there, if we want to get there, we need to embrace adaptability. What are we as a church willing to do? What are you as a Christian willing to do, willing to change, willing to modify, to get us to the place where God wants us to be, to get you to the place where God wants you spiritually to be? We need to think about those type of things, because the promised land is out there, and I believe God is taking all of us there, but we're going to run into some detours along the way. So adaptability is going to be key for us to get there. Lastly, when dealing with detours, we need to understand something really important. I mean, this is really important, but by far the most important thing about the sermon today. Are you ready for it? God works far more often in the detours than He does on the main roads. The Israelites are insistent, aren't they, that they're going to stay on the main road. They don't want to go anywhere else. They beg with Edom, please, let us pass through your country. We will not go through any field or vineyard or drink water from any well. We will travel along the king's highway and not turn to the right or to the left until we have passed through your territory. Twice, as a matter of fact, 2 times, they have to reiterate that that is their intention, and Edom still says, nope, sorry. There were only so many ways to get from Egypt to Canaan. Very few ways during this time. The King's Highway, well, it was the obvious route. It was the safest route. It was the easiest route. It was the route that was most traveled. And who doesn't want that type of route to the promised land? Wouldn't it be nice if God always took us along the easiest, along the safest, along the most widely traveled roads? But you and I know better than that. Several years ago, I accompanied a group of college students to a massive worship event. Every year the event gathers thousands of 18 to 25-year-olds into one arena with the best Christian music and the best speakers available. It's one of the largest worship events in the nation, if not the world. However, over the years, the event had become more and more dependent on the big-name personalities on the stage than the God it proclaimed. That year it happened to be in the Toyota Center in Houston. One particular evening as worship began, I found myself disenfranchised with the whole event, so I wandered away from it, and I stumbled into a small coffee shop. If I ever go missing, check all the local coffee shops. I stumbled on a small coffee shop a few blocks away. Now, I'm not the person who typically finds himself engaging in conversation with strangers. But sitting at the table next to mine was a young man about my age. By the look of things, however, it was obvious that the two of us were on completely different paths in life. He had jet black hair that hung all the way down to his knees, dark makeup around his eyes. He wore entirely black clothing except for the metal spiked necklaces, bracelets, and earrings adorning his person. He was the definition of a metal head, a person who listens to heavy metal music. I avoided eye contact with him as I sipped my coffee, but you must have been an extrovert, because soon he kicked up a conversation. Where are you from? What do you do? Why are you here? The usual. I told him I was a pastor in town for a worship event, and his eyes shined a little brighter. He told me that his father was a pastor, and he grew up a Christian, but had faded from the church over the years, and we talked about faith and belief and God. And sure enough, by the end of the conversation, this young man wanted to renew his belief again. So we prayed together. I left and I went back to the worship event where thousands of students were singing along to one of the most popular Christian bands in the world. And I thought to myself, isn't that interesting? The biggest worship event in the nation, right here at the Toyota Center in Houston, and God showed up at a coffee shop a few blocks away to restore the faith of one lost metalhead. The way to the promised land, it's filled with detours. But God shows up, and He works in those detours far more often than He works on the main highways of life. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verses 13 through 14, "Enter through the narrow gate. For wide is the gate and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow is the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." I don't know what your promised land is. I don't know specifically where God is trying to lead you. I'm not sure specifically where you are trying to get in life. But if it is something God is leading you to, if it is something that God has blessed and God wants you to be, if it is the promised land, His promised land, then it is worth whatever detours, whatever setback and challenge you face to get there. Don't stop pursuing it. Don't stop pursuing this faith because it's worth it. Don't stop pursuing the promised land. Lesson number 5.